it already was vivified. I was thinking if we flipped it around to think God is one, so all
Mm-hmm.
is of God. God is now he's calling relative which was never relative because God is one. So instead of it being I can't quite explain it. Do you know what I'm talking about, Ace? Can you see what I'm saying at all or no?
Say it again.
I can't figure it out in my head quite. It's instead of us needing
Mm.
that which he calls that which
Is. Yeah.
is,
Yep.
that is no, that which is not. It's basically our relativity from him is that which is actually not because God is one. So us being considered to be separate is that's the thing which is not actually it that is not. So I'm making a fool of myself. I can't
No,
say
you're
It's
it
not.
okay.
correctly. Yeah.
No, not at all.
You're on to something here.
Okay. Just
Mm-hmm.
reverse it. Reverse the interpretation from the human perspective to the God perspective. That which is,
Mm-hmm.
or that which is not, that will be. He calls that which is not as if it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are not actually separate. So that which is not would be our separation from God. He's acting like that is right now because it's relative and it's temporary.
Yeah.
It's a different way to see it. The other side.
That's it. That's it,
You're
Gabe.
a deep
I
But
thinker,
finally
aren't you,
got there.
Gabe?
I finally got there.
You're a
uh,
deep thinker, aren't you, Gabe? I can tell.
I don't
I can
know.
tell.
all right. So from now on, this is the Gabe channel.
No, no, no.
You're in charge.
Okay. Did my point did come across though
Yes,
after all my
yes.
stumbling? Okay.
If I can bastardize your comment,
You'll approve it. Go ahead, please.
this whole thing is weird. God's thinking is not our thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and He tells us God is calling what is not as if it were,
Yep.
and we look at the situation and we think, well, this is. I got logic. 2 + 2 is 4. A equals A.
Hmm.
What the hell do we know? God is calling what is not as if it were. And the faith of Christ is what manifests the righteousness of God, not righteousness manifests the righteousness of God. No, it's this awful death of his son that manifests the righteousness of God.
Mm-hmm.
What do we know about righteousness? How do we understand it? If the faith of Christ is that which manifests the righteousness of God, and then how do we even know how to think if God is calling what is not as if it were? We got a problem here
Mm-hmm.
with not only human thinking but with doubt as opposed to faith, and faith as opposed to doubt. So let me get back to seeing if I can help me out, Gabe. Take over.
And why, Gabe, do you still have chicken at the end of your name?
um,
Ace?
that's my new name. Yeah, Gabriel Chicken.
Oh, my
Nice to
goodness.
meet you. Yeah, God calls that which is not as if it were. So from our perspective, we are not yet living up to what He, in His own mind, considers us to be because of Christ. But from His perspective, we could say He calls us that which is not because this relative separation, this temporary thing where we are individuals and not just faces of him, that is what it is actually not, because God is one and all is of God. So this temporary relative separation we're perceiving, that which is not
Mm.
as if it were, we're living in this thing which actually is just a perspective of separation.
Right. So you could even take it an inch further and say, we are Him because your life is hid together with Christ and God.
Right. Yeah, we are hid in Christ and Christ is hid in God. So calling us that which is not, which the separation is actually just a perspective. So that is actually not that which is not. That is not a truth. You can't be truly by yourself, truly alone, truly separate from the source of your creation. So we're, yeah, being called that which is not. I'm getting confused again, but
He left us, Ace.
I'm
did?
here. I'm
Oh
here.
no, that's good.
I just had nothing else to say. I got
So, Gabe, what's your favorite part of Romans? I asked Ace. I want to know what your favorite part is.
Romans 9:18 through 25.
Okay, what's that?
Yeah, about the vessels of honor and dishonor,
Oh, yeah, that's really good.
because it explains. People say, "Well, why would God do all this? What's the point
Mm-hmm.
if we have no
Mm-hmm.
agency?" Well, He does it to display his righteousness in the vessels of honor,
Yeah.
and even the vessels of dishonor He carries with great patience. So He's doing
Mm-hmm.
this with a purpose, and this is how.
Yeah. You gonna
Yeah.
write your own book, Gabe? Ace, are you gonna write a book? You never know. You
Never
might
know.
want to. Hmm. So what's after Romans? You're saying? Oh, okay, hang on. It starts with Galatians.
Yeah, Galatians is the first letter that Paul
Mhm.
wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm arguing that it sets the tone, a major tone for the rest of his letters. Because there's something going on in Galatians that says you don't have to pay attention to those knuckleheads from Judea and Jerusalem. They're just there to harass you. Now we
Yep.
can get to work. So Galatians is like, let's get to work. Let's establish some ideas here. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to listen to the James gang.
Do you think it's at all possible that Hebrews could have been first?
No, I can clearly see that Hebrews comes after Galatians somewhere
Mm-hmm.
because Hebrews written by Paul was a love letter to the Jews. Because remember, at the end of Galatians, he calls the good guys in Jerusalem the Israel of God.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Israel of God was not out there harassing the Gentile saints.
Mm.
And so sooner or later in all of this material here, in all the timeline and all the stuff going on between Galatians, Thessalonians, the letter to the Corinthians, Romans, he has to address the Israel of God. And so his love letter to the Israel of God, we call the book of Hebrews. So that wouldn't be his first letter. It's too complicated. Hebrews is too complicated to be his first letter.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of thoughtfulness that goes into that book. The Jews all together, the good Jews, the Israel of God, the ones who are not harassing the saints with those mind games.
Would you guys agree that the Thessalonians were like the mature ones over the Corinthians, like were the immature believers, right? Would you say that?
I don't believe there's any evidence for that.
Uh-huh.
The Corinthians were pretty immature, but this is the early stages.
Mm-hmm.
These letters reveal, were written, these first letters, Galatians, Thessalonians, and Corinthians, were written when the churches were young.
Okay.
And if you know the dynamics of any social groups, it's the young ones who fall in first.
Yep.
The old geezers, they're not so easily adept at joining a group. But the young people, they want to join. And I think by the time he writes Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians, they have gone through. They're all married. They've changed a lot of diapers. They have established homes and businesses, and they're.
How long do you reckon Paul was in prison for? How long do you reckon?
I was wanted to say one more thing about Hebrews before we move on from there, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I was just wondering. To me, it almost sounds like it could be used as like a resume that he slaps down on the desk to Peter and the saints or something in Jerusalem to say, like, Paul has such a depth of knowledge about Judaism because he was a master practicer of that, right? He was the enforcer basically, and he understood it
Oh,
completely. And so he's actually making the case of Christ being the Mashiach to the Jews. It just seems like here I'm proving I know everything. I know more than you guys know about how he's from, Levi and all this and the Mashiach. And that's why I was wondering if it could be first.
Hmm.
well, just what you said, Gabe,
Mhm.
is kind of interesting because remember in Second Peter, Paul says some things that are hard to understand.
Mhm.
And I can see the dynamics of Peter's life that he maybe didn't read the letter to the Corinthians, the Romans, Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians, but he definitely might be talking about the letter called Hebrews.
Mhm.
He read that and he's saying about the letter to the Hebrews, that one is hard to understand. Because even when I read that one, I think, man, this is hard to understand.
Right. It just seems like Paul is taking all his knowledge from Judaism and he's plugging it into this is the Christ. This is the guy you've always been looking for. I can prove it. Quoting the Old Testament all over the place. And this is what it really means. It's like Paul was the one guy who could actually bridge these things and understand both sides of it and put it together like he does in Hebrews. That to any Pharisee that looks at it, it's like a legal document, and they can't even say he's not the Christ.
And there's such so in Galatians, there's such a dynamic hatred of the James gang for Paul's work that maybe we can suggest that the reason Paul didn't sign the book of Hebrews is because he knew he had to sneak it in under the radar. If he
Yeah.
had attached his name to it, they would have freaked out because they had already sent him to prison, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Maybe he wrote the letter of Hebrews to them from prison. We don't know. Just
Yeah.
trying to piece it together here to see the dynamics of the movement of God among the saints throughout the known world at the time.
Sorry, what were you saying before, Catherine, though, before I interrupted you to go back to Hebrews?
I don't know, Gabe. No, just joking. I'm a bit of a joker. Okay, so what was I saying? Go down. Oh yeah, the prison epistles. So, how long do you reckon Paul was in prison for, you guys? Does it actually? I guess we don't really know, but like, yeah,
How
just
long would it
wondering.
take you to write Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon,
A
1
long time, I reckon.
couple of years?
Maybe not. Maybe not, because he is inspired by the Holy Spirit, right? Anything with power of God, he could write that in like no time. Right?
So would you say somewhere between 2 months and 3 years?
Anything is possible. Could be 2 months. He might be writing like hours and hours on, because he's got nothing else to do, right? In prison. So, I don't know. Who
I was
knows?
watching a documentary and they mentioned he was on house arrest first, I think maybe for a
Yeah.
long time before he
Uh-huh.
was actually in a whole prison cell.
Yep. And wasn't he singing and like joyful and everything in prison and everything? Was that in his prison epistles or was that earlier on? I'm trying to remember. He and Barnabas were, who was it that he was in prison with and they were like singing and like really joyful and everything? Ace, help me out here.
Go back to the book of Acts and then you'll find it.
Okay.
I think it was
No
Silas,
worries.
Paul and Silas.
Okay. That's what I'm thinking of then. Mm-hmm.
So how'd you like this little thinking out loud, Gabe?
Yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit.
with the order of Paul's letters.
How did this get derived? I mean, just because of what's mentioned in letters after, that's how we know, or
Hmm.
because of Acts, right? Describing circumstances.
A little bit of Acts and a little bit of internal work of each of the letters. For example, with Philemon,
Mm-hmm.
you can tell he's writing it from prison. He mentions
Right.
that Onesimus was with him in prison, and he's writing the letter to Philemon to say, I know Onesimus is
Mm.
your slave. I've been working with him. Please take him back. He will be useful to you.
Mm-hmm. I got a question about on how do you say it? How do you
Onesimus.
say? Yeah, that one. um, what when Paul says that he beget him and he was his child in bonds or something. What does that mean?
It's an emotional description.
Okay.
It's not literal,
Mm-hmm.
but
Just always wondered that.
I mean, don't you use figures of speech sometimes that are not literal? Like,
Yeah.
I love you to death. What?
Yeah. Right. That kind of stuff.
What?
Do you, Ace? Do you love me to death?
Don't call the cops on
Uh,
me. Not yet. Give me a head start, like on the OJ drive on down the freeway.
Oh, gosh. Mm. So he wasn't still in prison when he wrote, obviously, Philemon, right? And
He
is that how you
was
say
in
it,
prison.
Philemon? He was in prison when he wrote Philemon?
Yes,
Okay. Because you
he
got
was.
the Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians all in green. I just wasn't sure about, like, why you
He
didn't have
wrote
any.
Timothy, First Timothy and Second Timothy from prison,
Yeah.
and it appears that he wrote Titus from prison,
Okay.
but I'm not sure. It could be
Uh-huh.
that Titus belongs up here in between First and
Okay.
Second Corinthians.
Mm-hmm.
But to answer your question, Gabe, it's just internal evidence from the letters themselves.
Hmm. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Did Knock write about this? The order.
Somebody in the side chat said that he did, that he mentioned something about it. Let me see. Let me scroll around. Who was it? Garuda King, I think, said that. Come on in, Garuda King, if you're still there.
I sent him a text and said you put the link up. He said he had other stuff going on. He couldn't make it because I was curious to see what he had to say based on his comments. He was talking about the structure, how it was revealed in a certain order that made sense.
Mm-hmm. Here's the comment. Knock breaks it down in the concordant commentary. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, when I first heard years ago that there was an order to Paul's letters, I was still very much unfamiliar with Paul's letters.
Mm-hmm.
And who would have thunk that the order, once you get the order right, it would actually reveal not so much more correct theology. That's not what I've learned
Mm-hmm.
over the years, but
Mm-hmm.
a more of a dynamic, a revelation of the love that Paul had for these saints and the love he had for God's working in him and God's working in the saints. Because there's a lot of intimate stuff in Paul's letters.
Yeah. Why do you say that Titus might be in between 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians?
If you read Titus, it's just
Yeah.
hard to place it with internal evidence as to when he wrote
Okay.
it,
Mm-hmm.
because he doesn't clearly say that he wrote it from prison. So it could
Uh-huh.
have been an early letter. And also in Second Timothy,
Yep.
there's one sentence in which he says, Titus has left me, or no, he says Demas has left me.
Mm-hmm.
And then without much of a comma, he mentions Titus along with a few others who were not with him. We don't know if he's saying, or I don't know if he's saying that Titus has left me, or just that he's not here at the moment to help me, to encourage me.
Yeah.
Where does Titus belong? I don't know. It could be an early letter, or it could be one of his later letters. So, but
Yep.
that's the only one I have a question about. Everyone else, I'm pretty certain this is the proper order.
Yeah. Cool.
Anyway, you can determine it for yourself. If you read Paul's letters, and you can say, "Oh yeah, I see some stuff here,"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
everybody writes and
Mm-hmm.
speaks
Mm-hmm.
with references, with ideas, with lingo that they borrow from current events and culture and where they are at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if Paul says these damn chains, I'm getting blisters.
Mm.
Well, now you know.
But we're never gonna know exactly the order. Now I'm choking up, guys. So I have to stop mute it. You're making me choke up, Ace. Anyway, yeah, we're never gonna know the order until we get snatched away. Really, when we have the mind of Christ, we will then know. For now, isn't it more like guessing?
No,
Just no.
it's not guessing. If you digest the letters and you can see clear indications
Okay.
of things going on around him.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I'll give you something weird that you might
Weird.
in Timothy.
Mm-hmm.
One of the letters in Timothy, he says, "I have run the race. I have
Yeah.
completed. I finished the course." Well,
Mm-hmm.
this him saying, "I have run the race."
Yep.
It might
That's
be
true. You're right, Ace.
not only that, but listen to this, without
Mm-hmm.
interrupting.
Mm-hmm.
It him saying, "I have run the race" might be a reference to Nero, the Caesar of Rome, who was in the news at the time because he was in a chariot race and he cheated. He had 8 horses when the chariot race, all the other racers were required to have only 4 horses, and his chariot went around the corner so fast it dumped him over, so he never did finish the race. So Paul's reference to "I have run the race, I have completed the course," it might be a current events analogy that would make sense to those guys alive at the time. He didn't go out of his way to say, "I'm referencing Nero," but I'm telling you this because there are plenty of lines and sentences and discussions in Paul's letters that give it context
Mm-hmm.
and meaning, but you wouldn't see it if you just read the letter one time and think, "I've got it. I know what this is all about."
Yeah.
What's the other one where he references the games? It's healthy for the body to be exercising and talking about the games that were going on at the time.
Yes,
So you can kind of pinpoint that. It's just interesting, just like us today, Paul had news. It wasn't on TV, but it was word of mouth, and
right.
contemporary. Just it puts you in the world that way if you're looking for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Yeah, so this is the first time I've stuck Hebrews in the list. I've discussed this before,
Yeah.
but Hebrews has to come in some order,
Right.
and I disagree, Gabe, that it had to be his first letter. I'm thinking that the dynamics of Paul's churches growing and being, in the news among even the Jerusalem saints, that they were kind of pissed. They eventually got pissed that Christ didn't come back as their Messiah. And so Paul's letter to the Hebrews would be addressing that. So there had to be some time for a need for the book of Hebrews to show up.
Yeah, I guess I'm still confused about that a little bit. I mean, because it sounds to me like he's proving Christ to Jews in that. It just seems so much lesser of a conversation than the rest of the letters. It's like almost like, you wipe the canvas clean first and then you get down to business. Well, first of all, Christ is Christ. Let me explain it to you guys, the Hebrews. That's basically what the argument of the book seems to make, which is so far down the line of order of importance from the other stuff.
Yeah.
Could you read Hebrews 11:3 for me?
Well, I can't go out without.
Okay, all right. So let me. Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we understand that the eons have been adjusted."
Mhm.
And so, in my current understanding, Hebrews 11:3 is pivotal to understand what the heck is going on with that whole letter. The Hebrew saints, the Jewish saints, were puzzled as to why Christ hasn't returned yet. And so Paul is saying in chapter 11, verse 3, the time periods have been adjusted so that what you guys were expecting is not going to happen just yet. And also in Romans 10 and 11, he says, right before he says, "And thus all Israel will be saved," he says, they've been put on the back burner until the complement of the nations may come in. So maybe we could argue that because of Romans 11, Paul had to address them more fully, because he does introduce the thought in Romans 11 that they've been put on the back burner and others have been grafted in to annoy them, to make them jealous.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. It seems to me the audience, though, of the Hebrews that he's speaking to is different than the other audiences. It's just like he's just proving Christ to them.
That
And of
could
course,
be. That could
yeah,
be.
that's just how it sounds to me with the
Okay.
whole chapter. But I don't know where that would come. Like I said, to me, it sounds like a resume. Like, guess what, guys? I know a lot more about this than all of you put together.
Which would
And-
make me think that's why Peter said in 2 Peter, there's a lot of stuff that Paul says that we don't understand. Because he read the book of Hebrews and he said, whoa, this is over my head.
Yeah.
They're not really supposed to understand, are they? Because with the circumcision.
Well, it's to the circumcision, right? It's to
That's
them.
right. Hebrews is to
Yeah.
the circumcision.
Right.
It's not, the book of Hebrews is not for us. It's for the circumcision. So even the complexity went over their head of what God was doing with them.
It has beautiful things we can glean from it, like you said, like 11:3 about God adjusting the eons. It has stuff about Christ being the originator of faith. Yeah.
And Christ being the one through whom he made the eons.
Right at the beginning, yeah. To me, it just seems to speak to like all of Jewish history. It just wraps it up, like it's the end of the Old Testament almost. Or
wow,
that's how it seems to me. Like Paul is like putting a stamp on the Old Testament.
Insight. That's an interesting insight. Have you spent recent time reading it?
Not very recently, but I have read it a few times through, not that long ago, and that's how it sounds to me.
Okay.
maybe we should read it sometime soon just to check it out.
Yes. We should read it sometime soon before Jill comes over and harasses us again.
Well, that'll be tomorrow morning, probably.
And certain men came from Jill. Okay, that's all I got, boys and girls. You want to come in? You better do it now before you change your
Before?
minds.
Okay.
After show link is right there. Click it now. It's the last comment. So that you can have, hey, it's Friday. This is when Catherine normally does Fellowship Friday. So
Yeah, I've already done it. So yeah.
already done it? Okay, well, you can do
Yeah.
it here. And Catherine can lead the Hootenanny to show us how to have fellowship.
Ah, that's interesting. Okay, come on, Rhonda. Yeah.
Hey, there's Sean.
Number one is Sean. Okay, thanks for joining me, boys and girls. Share this little episode with somebody because I think it's important to consider the order in which Paul wrote his letters. And it might inspire you to dig more into Paul's letters, which reveal the evangel of our salvation. Cool. And good night, and give me a thumbs up and all that good stuff.
Yeah,
Grace and
gave you two.
peace.
Amen.